I come to the floor to ask a unanimous consent request, and I'm going to state the reasons for that before I ask for the request. And I appreciate my friend from New Jersey coming over to help me at this particular time. And so today the issue is fentanyl. Today's vote on this bill, as amended, should be a yes for every member of the Senate. This measure extends the life-saving authority placing fentanyl drugs in Schedule 1. In fact, a 15-month extension of this authority, similar to the bill that I offer right now, passed the Senate, and it passed the Senate unanimously in 2020. In case that you've not read the headlines for the past few years, fentanyl and its analogs are killing tens of thousands of Americans each year, and it happens that fentanyl and analogs are now the #1 cause of deaths for Americans ages 18 to 45, the most productive years of a person's life. The Drug Enforcement Administration placed fentanyl analogs in Schedule 1 in the year 2018. Congress has already extended this authority, like I'm seeking today, 5 times in 4 years. Now we're on the verge of extending it for a 6th time before it expires on March the 11th. During the Biden administration, these reauthorizations have gotten shorter and yet shorter. The periods of extension have been as short as just a few weeks. This has created constant doubt about whether fentanyl scheduling will even continue. I've received calls from families of people who have overdosed on fentanyl. I've received calls for law enforcement seeking our help for them to enforce the law. For the last 10 months, these families and these law enforcement people have been in terror that this authority will disappear, that thousands then would die from the fentanyl overdoses. We've extended fentanyl scheduling 5 times in 4 years, but 4 have been in the last 10 months alone. While extensions preserve a life-saving authority, this kind of legislation by extension is neither sustainable nor reflective of the great gravity of keeping fentanyl drugs in Schedule 1. A permanently scheduled solution is the best answer, but unfortunately, a permanent scheduling action isn't feasible right now. Now, why would that be the case? Because some members of Congress don't support keeping fentanyl analogs in Schedule 1, or maybe at all. Some reject our criminal drug laws altogether. That seems unbelievable, but that's what I sense from some of my colleagues. Fortunately, this is a fringe opinion and not very representative of the majority of Congress. Republicans and Democrats alike have voiced support for permanently scheduling fentanyl analogs, including even President Biden. But until Congress agrees on a bipartisan and a permanent solution, we must maintain the authority by extension. For years, I've been leading the fight to extend this authority in hopes of finding a permanent solution. I've urged Leader Schumer to support measures that extend fentanyl scheduling as long as possible. I've asked President Biden to engage with bipartisan congressional leaders on a permanent solution, and I've requested that Chairman Durbin hold a hearing on this issue in the Judiciary Committee. All these requests have obviously gone unanswered and ignored, or I wouldn't be here today asking for unanimous consent. Scheduling fentanyl analog matters, and why does it matter? It can save lives. Congress has the power. Congress has the responsibility to act. So we ought to do that in just a few minutes. But we can't make meaningful bipartisan change unless we have enough time to do it. So let's pass a long-term extension and finally then lead the way to a permanent solution. So, Mr. President, this is my unanimous consent request that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 45, S 1216. Further, that the Grassley amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from New Jersey.
I appreciate it. I have to preface all my remarks because of my deep respect for the senator from Iowa, the senior senator from Iowa, and I respect him not just because he slays it on Twitter. I respect him because of his heart, because we have a great working relationship, because we have worked together to deal with the drug crisis in America. We've worked together to make the judicial system more just. And what you hear from the senior senator is passion that comes from the crisis. As he said, I've traveled his state considerably, and the opioid crisis is a crisis from New Jersey to Iowa, all over our country. He gave grievous statistics, but you could hear from his heart, these are families he knows, people who have seen the tremendous loss of young people through opioid overdoses. And so we cannot, in this country, tolerate one more overdose. I agree with the senator's sense of urgency. We cannot tolerate one more death. We have to address this public health crisis. But with this goal in mind, I cannot support the bill as it is offered today, because extending the temporary scheduling of fentanyl analogs alone is a failed experiment. We have seen scheduling, this temporary scheduling. We're in it right now. Class-wide scheduling has not curbed the overdoses. In fact, overdoses have increased during the period that fentanyl analogs have been scheduled by nearly 40% from June 2019 to May 2020. Now, here's what makes it even worse. As a result of just blanket class-wide scheduling, this broad sweep approach, the FDA recently testified that there is a potential life-saving antidote to these fentanyl analogs called basically a stronger version of naloxone. This has been placed, that stronger version has been placed because of this blanket scheduling as a Schedule 1. The FDA knows that this could actually endanger more people. Why, in the midst of a public health crisis, are we criminalizing the next naloxone instead of rushing it to the hands of researchers for study and evaluation? When you put something at Schedule 1, it's this declaration that doesn't even have any health benefits. This is bad science and therefore bad policy. This bill, as it is now, would not prevent the steady increase of fentanyl-related overdoses that we are seeing nationwide. It wouldn't achieve that because we've had temporary scheduling and it's still going up. It will not prevent the losses of one loved one that we see happening right now, or the pain that motivates my friend and senior senator from Iowa. This is a public health crisis, and our strategies should be informed by the science as a public health response. It requires a response that's dictated by science and evidence-based interventions. Temporary scheduling, again, is not simply that. Class-wide scheduling impedes scientists. It impedes researchers' ability to develop evidence-based public health solutions needed to overcome the fentanyl crisis and deal with these fentanyl analogs. Look, right now, temporary scheduling, it's given this false impression that Congress is doing something to deal with fentanyl analogs while the death count goes up. But what it has done really is allowed government to neglect the deeper calling for us to really deal with the challenges as they are. There is a lot of evidence-based intervention strategies, things we know work that we are not investing in. There are things that could help these crises in our community. And fundamentally, research by the FDA has confirmed that what is being proposed, class-wide scheduling, has improperly scheduled substances with therapeutic promise and low abuse potential. We need to submit all fentanyl-related substances to the same scientific evaluation that we've done for other controlled substances. We need to test for their dangerousness. We must identify those that might be life-saving overdoses. But all we've done for nearly 4 years now is schedule these substances without thinking about the scientific and medical evidence. And kicking the can down the road by temporarily scheduling these substances yet again now without making any effort to follow the science, to follow the scientific process, it's irresponsible. We are preemptively criminalizing substances that may not be harmful and may actually be antidotes that might be the answer to help curb these horrific overdoses and these horrible deaths. Temporary scheduling of fentanyl analogs without testing for pharmacological effects means that people will be convicted and incarcerated for substances that may have no pharmacological effect. And so I want to again make clear that I am committed to ending this pandemic. I carry a picture in my wallet of someone that died from an overdose that was given to me as I crisscrossed this country to never forget the everyday emergency. As the president mentioned in his speech to this body yesterday, confronting the opioid epidemic is something that Republicans and Democrats united can get behind. It should be bipartisan, but at the same time, our response should not be guided by the same old drug war ideologies that didn't stop the overuse of drugs. It should be guided by the scientific evidence. It should be guided by compassion. It should be guided by what works, and class-wide scheduling ignores the scientific and medical guidance. It sets in place dangerous precedent. It repeats mistakes we've made too many times in the past. I've seen the drug war go awry. I've seen this body act in ways that have compounded problems and not helped people. I've seen that people with addictions that are diseases with nothing but jail and prison. We can get out of this crisis if we follow science, if we follow what works, but it means Democrats and Republicans coming together. I have tremendous respect for my colleague. I know we can find a way to move forward together. I know if we continue to work together, we're going to find a way forward. And I know, because of my experience with the senior senator and his grace, I know if we dedicate ourselves to working together, we can get good things done for this country. We've done it before. In this case, I think we can do it again. So I, with the deepest respect to my colleague, I respectfully object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I'd like to have just a short rebuttal, and I thank my friend for being kind in his remarks about me. I know that he and I work together on a lot of pieces of legislation. I want to express my disappointment that my bill to extend fentanyl scheduling by 14 months cannot proceed at this point, but I won't back down from trying to extend this authority in a meaningful and long-term way. There's more than one way to advance this bill. Today's vote is just one of those ways. Like history shows us, this authority can be included in funding legislation or move as a bipartisan unanimous bill. I'll continue my efforts for its inclusion in the upcoming omnibus appropriation bill and urge my colleagues to support it. And I'm going, unless the senator from New Jersey has something to say, I'd like to proceed on another issue.
No.
Okay. Mr. President, can I proceed?
Yes, Senator from Iowa.
Thank you. There are 192 nations on the face of this globe. Not one of those 192 nations, including Ukraine, is a threat to Russia. Now, regardless, the Russian military is continuing to wage a full-scale war on the nation and the people of Ukraine. I'm not sure the reasons because I don't know Putin. The highest I've been in the leadership of Russia was once or twice in my life having a meeting with Mr. Lavrov, the foreign minister. But I think when it comes to Putin, he's got to satisfy his ego, or he's sick, or maybe both. The Ukrainian military and civilians are fighting for their homes, and obviously they want to be an independent nation. They have our moral support and even some of our weapons, and they probably need a lot more help from the United States, short of putting troops in that country. I wish we'd gotten them more defensive weapons before this invasion, and I still think there's more that we can do. I'm an original co-sponsor of the NIAT bill. NIAT is the word for no in the Russian. And it's literally this legislation that goes by this acronym, NIAT Act, literally says no to Russian aggression with tough, targeted, and support for Ukrainian resistance efforts, even if that turns into a guerrilla war and a number of other bills to crush the Putin regime. Russia, as we know, is a major oil and gas producer. So Putin's actions are hurting not just Ukrainian and Russian citizens, but Americans as well. Just think of the $1 or more increase in the price of gasoline we're paying today compared to 1 year ago. This situation comes at the same time Americans across the country are already paying more for the gas than at any time since 2014, and that dollar adds up or comes from AAA data. Last night, I was encouraged to hear President Biden pledge to, quote, use every tool at our disposal, end of quote, to limit gas price hikes after he imposed sanctions on Russia. So it is time for Congress and the White House to rethink policies that threaten our energy independence and at the same time our national security. That's why already this week I have helped to introduce the American Energy Independence Act with Senator Hawley that would reverse the president's shutdown of the energy sector and return to full protection. So we would have energy independence like we did until 12 months ago. Last year, the president talked about buying American products. Last night, I should say, he talked about that. Yet, it seems like oil and natural gas, very major components of our economy, were excluded from his rhetoric. When it comes to oil, the United States imports nearly 700,000 barrels of oil a day from Russia. That's why I introduced legislation yesterday with Senator Marshall that would ban purchases of Russian oil. I'm also backing a new bill by Senator Rubio to make American oil companies sever ties with Russian state oil and gas companies, as many of these companies already have done. I support harsh sanctions that hit Putin where it really hurts him, and in turn, you affect the entire Russian people, which they're innocent of this dictator's running their country, all the harm he's causing them right now. But we ought to free the world from Russian energy blackmail and keep gas affordable here at home with American-produced energy. Some of my colleagues are looking to lower prices at the gas pump by pushing for a gas tax freeze. That would be a very short-term, unsustainable move that would blow a hole in a highway trust fund. Instead, I hope colleagues on both sides of the aisle can work with the President to reverse decisions that have increased the price of domestic fuel production. You remember, on the first day in office, President Biden decided to shut down the Keystone Pipeline. President Biden should restart and expedite that pipeline. Also, in January 2021, President Biden issued an executive order pausing new oil and gas leases on public lands and federal waters. In July 2021, the Interior Department halted all oil drilling on leased land within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Now take all these actions, signal to capital investors that the heavy hand of the federal government will work against fossil fuels investments at every turn. You know, you read about bank regulators all the time discouraging banks from making loans to energy fossil fuels. This hostile regulatory environment has crippled investment in fossil fuels, which in turn is the reason we have high price of gasoline. Instead of more red tape, the President and Congress should work to cut regulations and federal permitting that slow down and has slowed down domestic energy production. We were, as you know, energy independent 12 months ago. Now we are energy dependent. We have the President begging OPEC and Russia to ship us more oil. Policies that encourage investment in fossil fuel production will increase domestic production, and the result would be lower gas prices, just like we can look back in the last 12 months, and all the action that's been taken has driven up the price of gasoline. But instead of focusing on domestic energy independence last fall, as I've already referred to, President Biden instead asked OPEC to pump more oil. The OPEC cartel, of course, did not honor that request. In 2000, when he was a senator, now President Biden acknowledged that anti-competitive behavior from OPEC harms American consumers and called on President Clinton to consider legal action against OPEC. OPEC is an organization which blatantly colludes to raise the price of oil. I have introduced the bipartisan bill entitled No Oil Producing and Exporting Cartels. It goes by the acronym NOPEC, which would allow the Department of Justice to hold OPEC accountable for its anti-competitive behaviors that artificially inflate global oil prices. I ask again for President Biden to publicly support the passage of NOPEC and work with Congress to pass this legislation into law. Besides focusing on fossil fuels, we know that ethanol makes up 10% of the gas sold in the United States. When oil prices are high, it gives higher blends of ethanol a clear competitive advantage. Historically, gas prices gradually rise in the spring and peak late summer when people are driving more frequently. But last fall, the Supreme Court rejected EPA's regulation allowing year-round E15 sales. Congress must move quickly to ensure that E15 can be sold this summer. E15 is a cleaner, higher octane type of gasoline that contains more homegrown ethanol and less petroleum. Both biodiesel and ethanol are proven domestic supplies of fuel that enhance our energy independence and at the same time lower greenhouse gas emissions. Domestic biofuel producers are ready to step up and to give consumers lower gas prices that increase our national security and provide jobs in the heartland, good-paying jobs. Most Americans do not care where the oil was produced when they fill up their gas tanks. They just want to fill up their gas tanks without taking out a loan to do it. But when conflict occurs in oil-producing regions around the world, Americans quickly realize the importance of your gas being a mix of West Texas crude and Iowa ethanol. In just over a year, we can see how the United States, is losing energy independence. Instead of focusing on domestic fuel production, the President and his administration have caved to the most radical environmentalists in shaping our energy policy. It's time to reverse course. I'm taking the President at his word when he said in his State of the Union address last night that he wants to use every tool at his disposal to limit gas price hikes. So I have just given several ways that we can use every tool that the President's talking about. And of course, it's time to get to work. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.